What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of entitled people. Hope you're all doing awesome today, and let's get right into today's Reddit posts. Traffic control revenge. So I heard this story today in my traffic control class. We were talking about how annoying it is when you set up cones for a construction job, and there's always some guy who takes pleasure in purposefully knocking the cones down. One of the old-timers in the back pipes up with this story. One time they were working in the desert installing a long pipeline in the late 80s or early 90s. It's a 3-month project. Every day for about a week, the same guy in a new black Cadillac drives down the site and knocks down the cones and then peels off. Every day it takes about 40 minutes to put the cones back up. It's about 700 feet of cones this guy knocks over. By the second week, the foreman was fed up. At the end of the day, they grabbed about 10 cones, turned them upside down, plugged the hole at the end, and filled them with cement. On Monday, when everyone came back, they randomly placed the cement-filled cones in between the regular cones. And just like clockwork, the Cadillac comes screeching around the corner, aiming straight for the cones, hits 2 of the cement cones before his bumper falls off, and dents his hood, and he slides to a stop. All the construction guys are laughing at him and flipping him off. He burns rubber to get out of there, leaving his bumper, never to be seen again. Of course, by now, everyone in the class is laughing, and our instructor looks appalled. He was like, "Those were different times. Do not ever do this." It was very funny. Please remember to respect construction workers. Yeah, this poor teacher for the traffic control class must have just been thinking, "Man, I'm just trying to teach this class about directing traffic and keeping people safe." And some guy in the back is like, "Oh, by the way, here's how we destroyed some dude's car." Tree justice. Neighbors found out. I bought my house, in part because it had a completely private backyard, screened in by 50 to 60 foot tall Douglas firs and western red cedars, running along the property line. There was a single house on the other side of the trees, after their driveway, but was otherwise basically a forest back there. About a year after I moved in, I came home at lunch to find almost half of the trees along the back of my property line had been torn down. Apparently, a developer had purchased that lot and was going to build a bunch of cookie-cutter townhomes, but they left the main house that was already there. I was pretty upset at that removal, but the developer gave me a survey excerpt that showed the remaining trees were situated directly upon the property line, and professed they only removed the trees that were completely theirs. They lied. I was young and naive, so I took them at their word. After all, they would know what they were talking about, right? And I didn't want to make waves, being new to the neighborhood. Plus, it allowed more sun to reach my backyard, so I let it go. Sadly, in Washington, the statute of limitations for timber trespass is 3 years, so by the time I gained much of my knowledge in this area, it was too late to hold the developer accountable. Fast forward 4 years and I come home for lunch, again, and find my backyard trees being cut down, again. Only this time I had the survey from the developer that clearly showed the trunks of the remaining trees were directly on the property line. The trimmer was dropping branches into my yard and onto my shed, which damaged the gutter. I didn't notice this until later. And here's a before and after the trimmers showed up. Pretty ridiculous. After getting some attitude from the tree trimmer, I asked him if he knew where the property line was. He didn't, and to go ahead and get the owner so we could have a chat. A lady comes out with a cell phone, and the man on the line introduces himself as Jake. Name changed for the story, but it is important that he gave me a specific name. Jake says he's the owner and tells me that he wants to remove the trees and put up a fence, and that maybe he would plant some fruit trees on my land as recompense. I tell him that the fence won't provide the same privacy that these 60-foot tall trees do, and I'd like them to not be cut down. He informs me that he also bought the property just to my north, and that he wanted to be a good neighbor and wanted me to be a good neighbor too, which I took as a veiled threat. I told him I had the developer's survey showing the trees were on the property line, so we should both agree what happens to them. He wanted me to wait so he could come back from wherever he was, but I had to get back to work, so I told him to stop cutting and we could discuss later that evening. He agreed and I left to go back to work. At some point he called me back, but I was at work, so I let it go to voicemail, where he confirmed where to meet that evening to discuss what happens to the trees. My wife gets home later that day and sends me a text that guys are cutting the back trees down. Luckily, it was close to the end of the day, so I sped home and told the trimmers, in no uncertain terms, to get the hell off my trees. While I was there, I met the HOA president. I didn't know their development was part of an HOA until then, and he informed me he also told them not to cut down the trees. So Jake comes over later that evening and brings a younger man with him he only introduces as his nephew. I explained that in Washington state, trees that are directly on the property line are owned by both property owners as tenants in common and can't be cut down without both owners' consent. He takes a picture of the developer's survey, and I tell him I need to get an arborist to figure out what damage has been done and how best to address it, and that the rest of the trees won't be coming down. I was still trying to be neighborly, so I didn't bring up that he ignored our agreement to stop. I did say if he had come to me before, maybe we could have worked something out. He says he understands and they leave. In the interim, HOA president and I are texting, and he gets super belligerent that I'm considering pursuing the neighbors for damages. He apparently thought that I should just let them cut down the trees and be happy that they're building a quote, nice fence. He asserts that I must be angling to sue the HOA, which I tell him makes zero sense because they're not the ones who authorized the cutting. And he tells me not to contact him anymore. Okay then. HOA president owns a car wash and has a bunch of reviews about how belligerent he is, which makes sense from my experience with the guy. A couple days later, I get a letter from Jake's attorney stating I had given them permission to cut down the trees, and therefore had no cause to ask them for damages, threatening all sorts of legal hell if I sue. Considering I had his voicemail confirming we were meeting later to discuss the trees, I felt pretty confident I could overcome this claim, but it was still enraging to have someone so blatantly lie like that. It also turns out that Jake was really named Harry, and his nephew was the one named Jake. I guess Harry thought it was easier to pretend he was Jake when dealing with neighbors. They're both on the property deed. I don't understand the logic, but it was at that point I realized they were all liars, and there was no resolving the issue amicably. So I sued them for timber trespass. Took about 2 years, but their insurance eventually settled, albeit for not as much as I would have gotten if I'd gone to trial, which I wish now I had. They lied and repeatedly changed their story during discovery. At one point they said their trimmer would attest I told them to continue cutting, instead of my giving Jake or Harry permission like they originally claimed. But they were then unable to produce a statement from him. He noped the hell out when I sued them, left his rigging gear on the trees and everything. I also found out they had multiple code violations for grading and building without permits, so they have a history of flouting the rules and don't seem to think the rules apply to them. Anyway, we signed a release for the damages and their insurance cut me a check. I figured the matter was closed, and they understood the trees were co-owned and weren't going to be cut down without my permission. Well, late last year, I get a knock at my door. It's a process server, and I'm being sued for quiet title by Jake and Harry. Their complaint is from some no-name attorney, and aside from not including the exhibits, is vague, blatantly retaliatory, and frivolous. Doesn't mention trees or the property line. Just some language about how they think I'm going to make a claim to their property at some point in the future. So now I'm pissed and the gloves are off. I pulled the paperwork for their development and found the landscape plans and tree inventory reports. Apparently, all new developments in our county are required to retain a certain number of trees for canopy coverage, and this requirement passes on to the property owners. So these trees were specifically retained, placed in a private easement, and the plat map for the development states the trees shall be maintained and replaced if damaged. Same plat map says HOA is responsible for stepping in if the individual owners don't replace the damaged trees too. Looking up the county codes confirms all of this. These trees were designated retained significant trees and cannot be removed without county authorization. If they are removed, the county is authorized to fine the property owner of $5,000 per tree that was removed. Recall, they removed 8 of them. So I filed a code violation and the county enforcement officer came out and took pictures. He sent them a warning notice saying they must replant the trees or face fines. He also sent an email to their HOA saying if Jake/Harry don't act, they'll come after the HOA to fix the issue. Oh, remember how Harry said he owned the property in front of me? Yeah, he rents that out. And while looking up his lawsuit against me, I found out he was evicting tenants. He filed a declaration with pictures of the inside, showing he converted the downstairs of the home to an apartment, complete with its own kitchen. Sure enough, he didn't get any permits for this, and it was what the county ended up calling an illegal duplex conversion. Yeah, I turned him in for that, and he had to gut the whole inside or face fines. Code enforcement guy also made him clean up the outside for being a quote junkyard. I got paid nicely for the trees they cut, and now they have to replant them. The remaining trees are not coming down, and they had to gut their illegal duplex. I have more info on them if they keep it up. It would be a shame if someone investigated their other tenant properties, because they're obviously slumlords. I'm considering letting an attorney go to town on them for their frivolous suit if they don't accept my offer to dismiss. They f***ed around and found out. Don't mess with my trees. Pretty funny to think that the neighbor did all this just because he wanted to build a fence. And looking at the picture that OP posted, the trees already provided plenty of privacy before they were cut up. This guy definitely got what was coming to him. And sounds like OP still has dirt on him if he does try to do something like this again. Woman thought I was doing community service. I was at a campsite waiting for the sun to set so I can take pictures of the night sky. I wanted to include a picture with the landscape, but there was a few rubbish and dead plants, so I began to sweep and clear rubbish of the area I wanted to look clean for the shot. Afterwards, I sat down, put on headphones, and ate a snack. Then a woman came up to me and asked where my supervisor was. I hated her tone, so I gave her a dirty look and ignored her. She very rudely continued to ask me the same question. I told her to leave me alone and go away. She walked away in anger, then turned back to say, "I can see why you are in jail, mate." Then I realized she thought I was doing community service. When the sun started to set, I set up my camera gear. So she decided to move her four-wheel drive and park where I'm obviously aiming, to try and block me. When I aimed somewhere else, she would move there. I had to juke her to get my shot. Why the F are people so miserable? Well guys, thank you for watching, I appreciate it. If you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like, and also subscribe if you haven't already. So have an awesome day friends, and I'll see you next time.